Say that again. Open up my mouth. Okay, yeah. Hey, I hear myself. It's a real joy to see you here. Um, can't say enough, and I know a couple of you came a pretty long distance so you could find out some information. My name's Johnelle Raines, and I'm a former North Carolina public school teacher. I taught first grade for 29 years, and got concerned when No Child Left Behind came into play. And there shortly after, in 2003, I retired because I could see that it was not something that I wanted to participate in. And since then, I've been real active trying to steer people in another direction, trying to fight Common Core standards and trying to bring more awareness of how really easier it is to homeschool. Like I said, Conservatives of the Upstate is what I'm a board member there, and that's one of our main issues is education and trying to educate the public about what's going on in education right now. Conservatives of the Upstate members, along with Grandparents' Rights USA, are the ones that are sponsoring our event tonight. And our goal is to provide you with good information on how you can start educating your children at home. We have very qualified speakers here, and I want to thank them so much for agreeing to come speak tonight. And we just want to give you some opportunity to ask questions, so they're going to make a presentation, and then you will be able to ask some pertinent questions that you have in your mind after you listen to their presentations. I want to give special thanks to go out to Steve Haney for spearheading this project and lining up our guest speakers, and to John Schaefer of Grandparents' Rights USA for arranging this lovely venue and videoing the event. And it's going to be live, and it'll be recorded for future reference. So if you miss something, we'll provide that link to you, and you can go back and listen again to refresh your memory. Want to thank Junius Smith. He's back here with his lovely wife, Carol. He's the president of Conservatives of the Upstate, and he gave us the green light on this project and provided the funding for the refreshments from our voluntary donation kitty. We don't ask people to give money, but if they do, this is what the kind of things that we use that money for that people give, to try to reach out to people and motivate them in different areas. We meet every second Thursday each month at 6:30 on Bell Shoals Road, and we'd love for any of you that want to become a member. You can visit our website at conservativesoftheupstate.com, and we have some information back there on the handout table that you can also see about our group. Homeschooling is on the rise in our country. There has been a 61% increase in just the past 10 years. And according to many of the articles I researched, the top 10 reasons that parents are choosing to pull their children out of public school and homeschool are: number one, to keep their family values in the forefront and avoid indoctrination toward morals or values that they don't agree with. Number two, to avoid Common Core standards and over-testing. Number three, to allow their child to better pursue their dreams and interests and develop a lifetime love of learning. Number four, to be able to teach using the Bible as a reference and pray before instruction begins. Number five, to avoid bullying situations from other students. Number six, to accomplish more education in less time. Number seven, to provide more one-on-one instruction time. Number eight, to avoid their child being labeled. Number nine, to keep their child healthier and safer. And number 10, to teach their child survival skills. During our question time, I hope you will share with us why you are here tonight and why you are considering homeschooling. We're not here tonight to say that public schools are all evil, but to offer parents an alternative if they are finding that the public school system is just not providing the quality education that they want for their child. So let's get started by opening the meeting with a prayer. Junior Smith, would you lead us in prayer for our meeting, please? Amen. All right, so I'm going to start by giving you, I think if you got one of these flyers, Introduction to Homeschooling, on the back, we've got our featured speakers and a little bio on each of them, so feel free to read up on them. We're going to start with Gail. If you'll come up and lead us off in this seminar, we will definitely be listening with all ears.
Thank you, Gail.
I think you can.
Yep. I think I may have some Italian in me because I use my hands an awful lot when I speak. I am Gail Ferrier, and I am thrilled to pieces to be able to talk to you about homeschooling. It's something that we have been involved in for longer than I want to think about how old I am. But we homeschooled our first child in North Carolina because he had some learning disabilities, and I was telling Christy at the end of that year, I took him out to lunch to celebrate the fact that neither one of us had killed the other one. Then we moved to South Carolina and put all of our kids in private school, and after the first year, we just said we can't do this. And so we did a lot of researching about homeschooling in South Carolina. Made the decision to go ahead and do it. It meant we had 3 children we were homeschooling. I had a 14-month-old, and I was pregnant with our 5th child. And when the night we made the decision, I said to my husband, do you know what we're doing? Do you know what we're doing? If these kids fail, it's my fault. I can't blame it on a school or a curriculum or a teacher. It's me. And he said, I'm not worried. You'll do fine. And he turned over and went to sleep. And I said, Lord, you need to show me that this is what we're supposed to be doing because it scares the daylights out of me. And the next morning, when I woke up, I was just at total peace that this is what we needed to do, which does not mean that there were not times when I was looking for that yellow school bus to put them on and get them gone. There were not times when I felt like an absolute total failure as a mother and as a teacher. And if you had told me then that we would homeschool for 20 years, in the words of my husband's grandfather, I would have told you to wash your mouth out with battery acid. Not what I intended to do. 1 year, and then hopefully something else would turn up, but that was all I planned on doing. And by God's grace, we went through 20 years, and the one that I was pregnant with when we started graduated in 2005. So I have been out of this for 12 years, which again is longer than I like to think about. But I have still been involved in the homeschool community on the state level, and I love talking to people about homeschooling, particularly in South Carolina. It has been said that if you don't learn from the past, that you are condemned to repeat it. And so I feel like it's really important that we understand where we are, how we got here, and some of the struggles that we went through initially to bring us to the place that we are, and how is it that we have 3 options for homeschooling in South Carolina. So we started in the fall of 1986. At that point, the Department of Education used what was known as substantial equivalence, which essentially meant we needed to prove that we could provide an education that was substantially equivalent to what they would get in the public school. And so I went to the school district and got an application, and when I put together everything that they asked for, I had a 36-page application that I turned in to them, which included 3 references from educators who knew us and felt like maybe I could do a good job teaching my own kids. I turned in the application, and a couple of days later, I had a phone call from the superintendent saying, we'll be out to your house in 20 minutes to do a home inspection. And so they showed up at my house, and while they were there, he said to me, you just need to understand that if we deny you the right to homeschool and you choose to do it anyway, we will take your children from you, put them in foster care, and charge you with educational neglect. Okay, so we went before the school board and had people all over the country literally praying for us. And by God's grace, we were approved to homeschool. But in order to prove to them that we were doing substantially equivalent to what they wanted, I needed to turn in lesson plans for every class I taught for every child, along with how many minutes I had been teaching it every week to the school board. That was the way we homeschooled initially. There were families even then who were brought to court over what they were doing. And so South Carolina was, at that point, had no homeschool law. Today, homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, but every state is different in what they require. About the time that we got started, there were groups that were getting together as support organizations trying to help each other work through how do you homeschool in this type of a situation. One of the groups that formed in Goose Creek eventually became what is today the state organization, which is South Carolina Home Educators Association. That's the group on which I have served on their board since 2000 in various capacities. This is my last year. I'm serving as in a mentor situation this year because I feel like I need to have younger people taking over. I've been out of this long enough that younger families need to take over. But at that point, SCIA was formed for two reasons. The first reason was support and encouragement for homeschoolers, and that's still one of our two primary goals. We offer encouragement. We are not a legal option in South Carolina, but we offer support and encouragement to families across the state who are looking at beginning to homeschool. The second reason was for legal options, to let everybody know what was happening legislatively, and that's still our most important function. My job for the last 12 years has been to read every piece of legislation that is introduced in Columbia, and I still do that because there are all sorts of things that can kind of just slip in unawares, and we feel like it's really important that as homeschoolers you know what's going on legislatively. Now, because we're a 501, we can't tell you what to say, but we put out information and we say, okay, this is the bill, this is what it says, this is how it will affect you. If you like the bill, call your legislators and tell them you like the bill. If you don't like the bill, call your legislator and tell them you don't like the bill. So those are still our two primary purposes. Well, SCIA began to organize, and as they did, the Department of Education was real not happy about all these homeschoolers who were starting to pop up across the state, and so the Department of Education created some regulations to put before the legislators to try and do something about these homeschoolers. Part of that legislation was that every homeschooling parent would be required to have a bachelor's degree. They talked about requiring a bachelor's degree for every subject that you taught. They also required state-approved textbooks. Well, by the time homeschoolers found out what was going on, it was very late in the session, and you have to understand these were in the days before cell phones and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all of the rest of the kind of stuff, and our telephones were actually attached to the wall, and you got charged for calling outside of your area. Okay, but we developed phone trees, called all across the state, showed up in Columbia, let them know that we were viable voters and we didn't like this legislation, and it was put off until February, and in February of 1987, that legislation was defeated. Whew. Okay. But DOE was not done with us, and they started working on new regulations and new rules, and SCIA found out about it and formed a committee with the DOE to try and hammer out a homeschool law for the state. And when it came right down to handing it to the legislators, DOE said, well, those people really were not working for us, and so we don't agree with this, and they began offering amendment after amendment after amendment. And finally, at the very end of the session in 1988, option 1 was passed. Option 1 is still in function today. You can homeschool through the school district. It requires that the parent have a minimum of a GED, which was a major victory for us. You need to teach 180 days. You need to teach 4.5 hours a day. You need to teach core curriculum, which was math, reading, writing, history, science, and in the upper grade levels, journalism and composition, literature and composition. And it required that our students go into the public school to take their standardized test in the spring. The big factor in option 1 at that point was that they also required parents who did not have a bachelor's degree to take the EEE, which is a test that's given to prospective teachers at the university level. And so we were given a year's grace for those who did not have bachelor's degree to work through this. Enter Homeschool Legal Defense. And again, at this point, we strongly recommend that you look at joining Homeschool Legal Defense. It is an organization of lawyers whose sole purpose is to defend homeschoolers when they come up against issues. Homeschool Legal Defense went to bat for us at that point and brought a class action suit and won. And so the EEE was dropped from the requirements in option 1. Well, there were some parents who really didn't want to be able to homeschool under the school district because so many school districts were still antagonistic towards homeschoolers. Pickens County was not homeschool friendly, and one of the requirements of option 1 is that you have access to a library. Well, they required me to photocopy my library card and show them. I said, I've got access to the library. Just because I have a library card doesn't mean I'm going to use it, but I have access to it because everyone does. Doesn't matter. You needed to photocopy it and show it to them. So there were families who decided to get together and see if they could homeschool under an organization similar to what private schools had. And they formed what became South Carolina Association of Independent Homeschools. At that point, they required all of their members to join HSLDA because they were pretty sure there was going to be a court battle. And they were right. Within 6 weeks of the school year, 11 families in the Columbia area were charged with truancy and needed to appear in court. And at that point, the Department of Education came to SCIA and said, we are tired of fighting homeschoolers. Not only do you have lawyers, you have good lawyers. So we are going to drop this issue. Thank you, Lord. And so in 1992, option 2 came into being. Option 2 is SCAES. And a lot of people confuse SCAES with SCIA. It's what happens when you have similar acronyms. Okay? SCAES is an option for legally homeschooling. They still require that you have a parent has a GED, that you teach 180 days, that you teach the core curriculum. But they don't require all of the other things that option 1 does. And so SCAES, the thing with SCAES was because they had fought so hard for it, because they had committed themselves to legislators to say, yes, we will do the right thing. SCAES felt like they really needed to uphold a very high standard for their students. And so there were families eventually who said, okay, we sure don't want to homeschool under the public school, but we really don't like the standards that SCAES is setting. We would like to be a little more free and flexible in what we're doing. And so they got together, and in 1996, they were able to attach a third bill onto a separate, totally different bill and get it through on third reading, and that's how we got third option in South Carolina. Third option, like SCAES, requires a GED. It requires the core curriculum. It requires 180 days, and it does require a portfolio or a progress report. Today, there are 33 third option groups listed on the DOE website. You have a wide range of options, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But that's how, by 1996, we had 3 options for homeschooling in South Carolina. Now, in the midst of all of that, there were challenges, there were families who disagreed on what they were doing and how they were doing it, and one of the things that SCIA has done over the years is to try and get homeschooling families to understand we're all different. And I'll tell you, homeschoolers are very independent. But we can work together, and we have been successful in fighting both the DOE and the legislators on a number of issues. We're very thankful for that. A couple of years ago, a bill was introduced. It was introduced on Tuesday afternoon. I found it Wednesday morning. It would have eliminated third option groups. And third option right now accounts for about 90% of our homeschoolers. We sent out an alert statewide by noon on Wednesday and said, this is the bill, this is what it would do. If you don't like the bill, here are the names of the sponsors and here are their phone numbers. And by Thursday morning, 3 of the 4 sponsors had dropped off the bill. I personally talked to the man who's in the chairman of the education committee. He said, I will give this to the subcommittee, and the chairman of that subcommittee is himself a homeschooling father. I promise you it will not go anywhere. So it's the sort of thing that we could easily have lost our freedoms. And we're just very thankful that God has protected and provided for us over these years. We have a family just this past weekend who has had a major issue with DSS and wound up their kids being taken out of their home. Totally unjustified, absolutely no reason for it whatsoever. And so we sent out an alert yesterday morning, and by afternoon, the governor's office had gotten over 100 phone calls from homeschoolers. And so based on that, he was willing to meet with the family. He turned the case over to his attorney, who has promised it is top priority. The kids will go back home. So there is value in numbers. And again, you know, we would love to have you join SCIA. It's not a requirement. We're not a legal option, but there's value in numbers. And when we can tell a legislator that we have 1,000 members, that speaks volumes, because 1,000 families is 1,000 votes. And they're going to listen when families call and when people say, we don't like this legislation. All right, so when you're ready to homeschool, you have 5 steps to take. And I'm going to cover 3 of them. Christy and Billy are going to take care of the other 2. But the first thing that you need to do is decide that you are actually going to do it. And that's a hard place to start. Yes, I am going to do this, and then figure out why you're going to homeschool. If it's a whim, if it's just, you know, I don't like the teacher he's going to get next year, and so we're just going to pull him out and homeschool, you will not last, because you're going to have some really hard days, and you're going to be looking for that yellow school bus. And so decide why you're going to homeschool, and then write it down, because you're going to wind up going back and saying, why did I decide to do this? And if you can pull out that paper and say, oh yeah, that's right, okay. Then you get up the next morning and you start again and you do it. So figure out why you're homeschooling and then write it down. The second thing you need to do is to get legal. Now, to get legal means you need to join one of 3 options, first, second, or third. If you're joining the first option, you go to your local school district, you tell them you want to homeschool, and you ask them for an application. You fill it out. Promise you it will not be 36 pages. But you just fill out that application and turn it in. Now, you have to be aware of the fact that in South Carolina, there are actually 5 options for teaching your children or having your children taught. 1 is the public school. 2 is private school. 3 is brick and mortar charter schools, which are still public schools, but they're more run by parents. 4th one is virtual charter school. And there are a lot of people who are confused about virtual charter schools. Virtual charter school, you are teaching at home off a computer that you are given, but it's public school. It is public school directed, it is taxpayer funded, it is public school curriculum, it's public school teachers who oversee it, and on the DOE website, they will say virtual charter schools is not homeschooling. It is public school at home. And you need to be aware of the fact that is the difference. The 5th one is privately funded homeschooling. And that's where parent paid for, parent directed, parent decision. And that is true homeschooling. So if you're homeschooling in South Carolina, then you go through the public school. Or you go through SCAES, in which case you contact SCAES, and their website is scaes.org. Okay? And they will send you the application. You fill it all out. The beauty of SCAES is this is homeschoolers who run SCAES, so you're dealing with a very friendly administration. You've got homeschoolers who are helping homeschoolers. Your 3rd option is accountability associations. Now, if you go to the SCIA website, we have listed on there the 33 third option groups, and they are all different. So you need to do your research and find out what it is you need. Some of them are statewide. Some of them are local. Some of them do exactly what the law requires and nothing more, which means promise me that you have your GED and that you'll go ahead and teach, and I'll see you next June. And they require no accountability whatsoever. Some of them require a lot of accountability, and you need to show up twice a year with your curriculum, with your portfolio, to show them that you really are doing what you're supposed to be doing. Again, these are homeschoolers who are supervising, so they're very homeschool friendly. They're there to help you to make sure that you're accountable and that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. If your kids are 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, not an option. You can probably work with any of these, but once you start looking at junior high and high school, then you're looking at transcripts, you're looking at class ranking, you're looking at preparation for the college level, AP classes in some cases, and some of these 3rd option groups will do that. So depending on what age group you are talking about teaching and what you need and what you're looking for, do your research. Find out which one of these which one of the 3rd option groups works out best for you. And on our website, they're all listed with links to their website so you can get more information about them and contact information from them, and you know what they offer. And find one that works for you. And then go with that one. Strongly recommend that you go ahead and get legal before the school starts. You have to do 180 days. If you pull your child during the school year, which you can do, the days that he's already been in school counts towards that 180 days. But you only have a 10-day grace period. And after that 10 days, if you happen to have a neighbor or a grandparent or whatever else who is not real excited about homeschooling or about you doing it in particular, they can call DSS and you will have DSS at your doorstep. So get legal before you pull your kids before the school year starts. Make sure that you are signed up with one of these 3 options. And again, we recommend, not required, but we recommend HSLDA as an insurance policy just in case anything happens, anything comes up. Okay? All right, so you get legal. Third thing is you need to get your curriculum. And Billy's going to talk about that one. When we started homeschooling, there were about 5 options for curriculum. Today, hundreds, lots and lots of stuff. So Billy's going to cover that, but get your curriculum. And then the fourth thing is join a support group. And Christy's going to talk about support groups and the differences between a support group and an accountability association. There are some accountability associations that also offer support groups, but they are different entities. The association is what makes you legal. The support group is what gives you all of the added things that go along with rounding out your curriculum. We've got, because there were so many years when homeschooled kids were not allowed in the public school, homeschoolers have developed their own sports teams. And so we have a very extensive sports team for our kids in almost all of the different sports. And again, that's on our website, and you can find that. But those are the kind of things that a support group will offer to you, okay? Then the fifth thing is get started. And that's the hardest part out of all of this. I have had families who have called me and said, I've got my curriculum, I'm just scared to death, and I just can't do this, and I'm not sure I really want to start, and what am I going to do, and how do I do this? Get up tomorrow morning and start, and do it. And at the end of the day, go to bed, and tomorrow morning get up and do it again, and you'll have a second day. And I will warn you that somewhere around the 5th or 6th day, you're going to hit a wall, and everybody will be totally stupid. Nobody will know anything that you've taught them. It's going to be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you will not have gotten half of your subjects done, and the dishes are still in the sink, and nothing's ready for supper, and you're going, this is it, I can't do this, I quit. And the thing is, no. You get up tomorrow morning and you start again, and you do it, and you commit to 1 year. We strongly recommend you commit to 1 year. Don't commit to 20 years. Commit to 1 year. But don't start in September and then in October say, I can't do this. There's no way. And put your kids back in school. If you commit to 1 year, get it through the year. And then at the end of the year, then evaluate. And we have found that it's the kids who are more ready to go on to a second year a lot of times than the parents, because the kids find this is wonderful. I've got extra time. I can work at my own pace. This is a good thing. And it's the parents who are saying, okay, but you will. You'll come back, you'll do it a second year and a third year, and eventually you'll be up here teaching others how to get started in homeschooling. And you will look back the way we have. All 5 of our kids have graduated from homeschool. I have 12 grandchildren at this point, and most of them are currently being homeschooled. So I think that's a testimony to the fact that our kids enjoyed the experience that they had. But I'm going to one other thing. I've got 1 copy left of this Exposing the Trojan Horse. If you want to understand the differences in charter school and virtual charter school as opposed to homeschooling, this is a very good DVD to explain that. So if you're interested in that, let me know afterwards and I'll give you that one. Okay? Christy?
That was awesome. I could listen to Gail for days. Unlike she and Mr. Billy, who's going to talk about curriculum, I'm not really qualified to be up here. I just said I would do it. So I apologize for that. And I apologize for my southern accent. I am college educated, believe it or not. But, you know, southern born and bred, this is what you get. Okay. I'm going to turn this just a bit. I went back and watched the recording of 2 years ago when we did this. I made changes. Y'all are getting a much better deal than the poor people 2 years ago. So I'm just throwing that out there. Anyway, I am in my 8th year. When we start back in the fall, it'll be my 8th year of homeschooling my 3 kiddos. And I still don't know what I'm doing. Just to be perfectly honest. I have little triumphs along the way and lots of struggles. And every June or probably March would be more accurate, me and God go in the laundry room together, and I question my reason for living and why he called me to do this, and are we really going to do this one more year? And he keeps calling us back to it. So we keep at it, like Miss Gail said, until or unless the plan changes. I'm going to talk to you today, and just very briefly, because honestly, what I have to say can be said briefly. I told Gail, I tried to think back 8 years ago to when I was sitting in your seat and scared of this whole process and not knowing what any of this meant, what a co-op was. You know, I knew nothing. We had been in a Christian school with my first up through second grade, and homeschooling wasn't even on the radar until some life changes happened, and God said, "Let's do this." And we're like, "Okay, don't know what you're talking about," but that's how we learn to walk independence, I guess. So, as far as co-ops go, I call them co-ops. They're called support groups. They have different names, but like curriculum, there are lots of choices out there. So I'm going to explain some of the different choices that you have just in the upstate area to get involved outside the home. But I'm not necessarily here tonight to try to convince you to join a group. I'm not. There are benefits that I'll talk about in just a minute, but there are people who are perfectly thriving and doing well without being a part of a group. And so you will hear me say many times tonight to do what's best for you and yours. So I'm not pushing you to join something. I'm not pushing you to join mine. As a matter of fact, we're full. So I hate to say that, but we have about 60 families signed up, which is around 150 kiddos, and that's just a lot to cram into our meeting facility. So we've kind of found our sweet number of what works and how much is too much, and we have to kind of close down registration, which I hate, but it's a reality. So anyway, I'm going to talk about what groups are not first. Support groups or co-ops are not all the same. You have lots of different options out there, and you just have to find out what you're interested in, where your kiddos would thrive, what would be the most beneficial for you. And I'll go over a few of those differences real quick. You have some that offer core classes, and by that I'm talking about what Gail mentioned, the math, science, the things we have to teach, where you can pay an instructor, and you may even be able to drop them off and leave them. Just depends. Those are out there. Sounds like school, but probably just 1 or 2 days a week. So that option is out there for you. Some do offer core classes, but require you to stay and volunteer in some capacity. Other groups offer supplemental or enrichment classes. This is probably the category that my group, Christian Home Educators of Easley, falls under. Our classes are mom-taught. So you have a mom like me who majored in journalism, and I can teach a writing class here and there, or you have moms who love science or home ec or just whatever. And so we get to kind of teach out of our knowledge and experience, and it's actually a good system. True co-ops, in my opinion, are those that require their members to do something. Not all members have to teach by any means, but when you are cooperating, working together in this group to support one another, then there are lots of jobs that have to happen, and so it's kind of an all play is what I tell our folks. You have other groups that are curriculum based, like classical conversations. There are some Charlotte Mason based groups. I don't know if I can't think of any others, but I know there are several curriculum-based groups out there. Some groups have a fine arts focus. Easley has the Fine Arts Center of Easley, which has some homeschool opportunities. And then Artios in Greenville is a very well-programmed and well-run fine arts type of situation. They do major productions with the kiddos. I think they offer academic classes as well, but their big thing is very well done fine arts opportunities. Some groups are field trips only, so they don't meet like on a certain day of the week for classes, but they will get together twice a month or however often for field trips and activities. So that may be more your speed. And then there are some groups that focus more on the high school opportunities like Key Club and drama and prom and stuff like that. So again, lots of choices for you to consider. If you have the blue handout, or if you will want the blue handout by the end of the evening, I've tried to list many of the upstate area co-ops. This is not all-inclusive. I don't have enough paper for that, but just the ones I'm a little more familiar with, and the ones that are a little more in our Easley, Pickens, Anderson kind of area was what I listed on here. But then there are sports and other opportunities, Scouts and American Heritage Girls, and just all kinds of stuff for you to get involved in if you want to make sure you and the kids have some human interaction other than with each other, because I need to talk to grown-ups every now and then. So, lots of options for different groups and co-ops in the area. The second thing that groups are not necessarily businesses. Some of them, like RDOs, I think is actually like a franchised kind of co-op kind of thing, and they charge a little more and may have paid workers. I don't even know about that. Most of them, it's people like me who are dumb enough to say, I'll do that. I can handle that. And 8 years later, here you find yourself standing in front of people acting like you know something. So leaders are volunteers. Leaders are homeschool moms most of the time, just because dads are at work. And so I would just tell you to remember that going in, if you join a group, going into it, just remember that they're people just like you, that they have to spend time every day teaching their kiddos and then do, all the extra stuff. So maybe a little extra grace could be, not that my people aren't good to me, I'm not saying that. I have a great group of folks. But then, I've already touched on this, but the third thing that groups are not is they're not absolutely necessary. You can't homeschool without joining a group. However, I'll tell you some benefits just in case you want to. Of course, there's the opportunity for friendships and fun activities that you may not always have access to. A lone family may not be able to do a certain field trip, or you're not going to produce necessarily your own yearbook or things like that. So there are opportunities and experiences that a group would offer that you alone wouldn't necessarily be able to have. But for the kids, of course, there's friendships. There's an opportunity for them to sit down and learn from somebody else. I'm amazed at the glowing reports that my kiddos' teachers at co-op always give me of how good they are and hardworking and good listening. And I'm just like, where are these people the other 4 days of the week? Because they don't live at my house. They're completely different, which I'm glad. I'm thankful, but still. So there's that opportunity. There's the opportunity for you and the kids to learn to navigate relationships, some conflict resolution, understanding differences, and learning to love and show grace and value others even when we are a little bit different, because like Gail said, we certainly don't all homeschool for the same reasons and in the same ways. So there's opportunities for that. But as a mom specifically, in my years at Chi, I have seen and experienced time and time again immeasurable value in just knowing that I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that has to get up from the school table and go cry in the laundry room because people are being difficult and don't want to do their schoolwork. Even though I've tried to do everything right and be prepared and make it fun and all those things, it's just not always an easy thing to do. And let me tell you, I've had countless conversations where I can look at somebody else and say, me too. And then we laugh together, or we cry together, or we pray together, whatever the situation calls for, and we walk away encouraged because there's somebody who knows what you're going through. And that, I think as a homeschooling parent is probably the biggest benefit of belonging to a group, is just being able to share those struggles and experiences. But it may also give you an opportunity or a place to teach out of your passions and experiences and share some of your knowledge with others and things like that. So that is another benefit. I would just say this and then I'll be done. Take time, if you're wanting a group, take the time to find one that fits you. I tell our folks that sometimes things just aren't a good fit. It's like clothes. It's not comfortable. It doesn't wear well. Take the time to shop around and find one that does, because with all the choices that we have out there, I guarantee you'll find something. Talk to people who are already members of the group, get their feedback on what their experience has been. See if you can come visit the group, send in on classes, ask the leadership question. I love starts around February, I think. Every February, March, April, my role at CHI each week becomes giving tours, telling people what we're about, what we do, showing them around. I think that's fun for some strange reason. But I encourage you to visit, get information, talk to people before you sign on the dotted line and commit. Or if you try it out for a year and it wasn't a good fit, then, make a change. Don't be afraid. That's another thing I would say to homeschoolers, as a homeschooler in general, don't be afraid to make a change. I hate change. Hate it with an ever-loving passion. I do. But there have been times in these 8 years that curriculum that worked well for child number 1 is a disaster for child number 2. And guess what? I have to start over and make a change. It's okay. It's all right. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Don't feel pressured to join a group if that's not what works best for you and your family. You're responsible for your kiddos. You're not responsible for everybody else's. So just do what works well for you and yours without trying to live up to other people's practices and expectations. And then I will say, this is another just overall statement about homeschooling, not just about groups, especially as a new homeschooler, but even when you're 8 or maybe 20 years in, give yourself some slack. Don't be so hard on yourself. I would say lower your expectations, but I hate it when people say that. I don't want lowered expectations. I want perfection. It never lives up to that. So that's when I have to learn to cut myself some slack. We do the best we can. We rest in God's leadership and his dependence if we are followers of Jesus. And at the end of the day, it's going to be okay. Don't worry about getting it all right the first time around, because you're not going to. Nobody does. I don't care what they put on Facebook. Nobody figures it out and gets everything perfect the first time around. Maybe not even the second or third time around. So go easy on yourself. Be encouraged that you're not alone. And if a group is something that you're interested in, you can go to our you can look at this list for one thing, the blue paper. But you can also go to our website, CHEE online, CHEE online.squarespace.com, and I've listed links to all the other homeschool groups in the Easley area, because I don't see this thing as a competition. I see it as we're all on the same team, working toward the same goals. So if our group's not a good fit, or if we're full, I want you to find something that works for you and yours. So if you want to take a look afterward, just to get an idea of what our kind of group, which several in the area are like us, what we offer and what we do, our yearbook is a good place to get an idea of that. So I brought one of those tonight if you want to have a look at it afterwards. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Billy Whitbeck, and I'm, along with my lovely wife, Caroline, owners of a homeschool store in Greenville. They're on Woodruff Road, called Learning Cycle. So I'll be speaking here tonight about some curriculum choices, or I guess the title of my talk there is Navigating the Seas of Curriculum. And Gail is passing out an outline for us. Christy, that was a very, very poignant and inspirational talk. I think you're more than qualified to be up here. And Gail, I'm fascinated with what you went through, and I just want to thank you personally for all the hard work and commitment that you've put in over the years. I don't think we would be here if you and others like you didn't do that for us. So, what is your goal for homeschooling? Do you have one? I faced that question about 6 months ago. And Gail, to your point, when we started homeschooling, my wife and I, we have 3 daughters. I guess just a quick snapshot of who we are and how we got into homeschooling. In a span of about 6 months, we went from having all of our girls in public school. I was working in the software industry, and 6 months later, we were homeschooling them all, and I had lost my job, and we had opened a homeschool store. So there was a lot going on in our life, but that was 4.5 years ago, and my wife and I, we were on the same page, which is extremely important for wives, you to be on the same page as your husbands, husbands with your wives. My wife was on board with homeschooling long before I was, mostly out of ignorance on my part, not knowing what homeschool was even about. But we did not have a written goal, and I think that's a fantastic bit of advice. We knew why we were homeschooling to a certain degree, but I couldn't give a real succinct or clear answer on that. We can certainly look to the Bible, to scriptures, to see that we're commanded to teach our children. It says in Deuteronomy 6, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. So, although that doesn't speak specifically to homeschooling, it does speak to what you're commanded to do with your children, to teach them diligently. But still, I didn't have quite a defined answer to that. And this was just a few months ago. So I looked to our curriculum, which that's a mistake. You don't homeschool to use curriculum. Curriculum is there for you to use to achieve your own goals. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. But what is curriculum? Curriculum, if you look, it's a Latin word. Its derivative is Latin. It's from the word carrera, to run. It's even used as to run as if a race, a track, in a circle. Circle's always going on, always happening, right? It's not go from point A to point B, check the box, I'm done. That's not curriculum. Curriculum is always in use, always there to educate, to learn, to teach. Brought a pile of books up here. I'm surrounded by books these days, which is pretty fascinating if you knew me 5 years ago. Curriculum, in this book, Teaching from Rest by Sarah McKenzie, A Homeschooler's Guide to Unshakable Peace, wonderful read. But she says in there, curriculum is not something we buy, it's something we teach. Okay, so you are not a slave to your curriculum. You are not, again, like I said, homeschooling just to use a curriculum. It is there for you. So what does curriculum look like? Well, let me give some examples here that may not be what you're thinking. This is one of my girls' favorite books, Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. Has anyone heard this book or read this book? We listened to the audio of this book aloud, and it was an amazing book. It's about Nathaniel Bowditch. I don't know, has anyone heard of him, Nathaniel Bowditch? No? Definitely worth reading not only this book, but hearing more about him. But I'll pick up the story in chapter 7 here. Nathaniel is a 12-year-old boy living in the mid-18th century in Salem, Massachusetts. That's the hub, the center of all colonial ships and sailing. That's where it all comes out. They were very proud of that, actually. And he was an apprentice in a ship chandlery, basically a shop that provided equipment and tools to the ships. So 12-year-old apprentice at this shop. Let me just read just a little bit from here. So I'll pick up the narrative. He's running errands. Again, 12-year-old boy running errands for this chandlery. One day an errand took him, Nate, to a long building called a rope walk. He watched the rope makers walking backwards as they twisted the fibers into yarn, the yarn into strands, and the strands into rope. The rope makers were proud of their work. Most important thing on a ship, they said. You can't sail without cordage. That night, Nat started a notebook on everything about rope. Once an errand took him to a sail loft. He watched the sailmakers cutting heavy canvas into strips and sewing it back together again. Makes the sail stronger, they told him. Most important thing on a ship, the sails. If it weren't for sails, how'd you get anywhere? Nat added more to his notebook, everything about sails. Another errand took him to Ruck's Creek, called Knocker's Hole, because all day you could hear the thump, thump, thump of the caulkers' mallets caulking the seams of the ships. Most important work on a ship, they told him. If a ship isn't watertight, where'd you be? Nat added more notes, this time talking about caulking a ship. When Sam, his friend, dropped in again, Nat showed him his new notebook. Is there anything else to know about ships? Sam chuckled. Lad, you haven't even begun. Navigation. That's something else again. Want to learn it? I reckon I could teach you. So the winter, Nat was 13, he started a new notebook, Navigation, Nathaniel Bowditch, his book. By spring, the notebook was filled. Sam looked through it one day. It's all down here, lad. Get it in your head and you'll have it. What else can I learn? Nat said. Sam shook his head and chuckled. Blessed if I know. You've lighted all the cargo in my head. Mr. Ropes strolled back to Nat's desk. Nat, run over to my house, look up surveying in the Chambers Cyclopedia, will you? Hetty will show you where it is. Write down what it says about the start of surveying. You'll find everything you need on the desk. Nat hurried over to Mr. Rope's home. A cyclopedia? What in the world was that? Well, Hetty would show him. Soon, he was sitting at the desk in the library with 4 big books in front of him. Ephraim Chambers' Cyclopedia, or Universal Dictionary of Arts and Sciences. He turned the pages. Everything was here. Everything. I'd like to begin at A, he thought, and read right through to Z. But now he must find out about surveying. The next thing Nat knew, Mr. Ropes was striding into the library, calling, Nat, what in the name of sense happened to you? Did you go to sleep? No, sir. I'm copying what it says about surveying. There's a good bit to look up. It's a little hard to tell where the start of it is. I looked up trigonometry. That's the kind of mathematics they use. And I looked up theodolites. That's the kind of telescope they use. And then there's something about finding your position by sighting a star. So I got into astronomy, and I can't tell yet where surveying starts, with astronomy or trigonometry or a theodolite or Nate Bowditch. Mr. Ropes threw himself in a chair and laughed until he wiped his eyes. Where did it start? In what country? That's all I wanted to know. Give me that book a minute. See? Right here. It says it probably started in Egypt. That was all. I'm sorry. So I was right. Nat said, oh, that's all you wanted to know? Mr. Ropes was still chuckling. That was all. I'm sorry I put you to all that work for nothing. Nat grinned. It wasn't work. It was fun. May I keep the notes I made? This is a fictionalized history, but it's based on history. Nat Bowditch, he did keep a notebook, and he built that notebook into what was called the American Practical Navigator, which has been quoted as the premier reference work for practical marine navigation. So what was his curriculum? He didn't have a teacher. He didn't have textbooks. He did it on his own. What was his curriculum? Let me give another short example here. Again, this is probably not what you're thinking of. A curriculum talk? What is he talking about here? We had just started homeschooling. Had 3 girls at home. And when one of my girls was young, she was going through her math lesson and could not, for the life of her, figure out what the commutative law was, how it worked. You know, the commutative law, 1 + 2 = 2 + 1. And it was just not connecting in her head. And so my wife was having one of those days that Gail maybe mentioned, and things were just boiling to a head with tears over the commutative law of all things. And so my wife wisely took my daughter aside and said, let's put it away, we're done, let's go do something. And nowadays in our house, doing something means let's go read a book. So my wife sat down with a Shel Silverstein book. Can't remember which one it was exactly, but it was, the poems she read was about a character named Runny Babbitt. So not Bunny Rabbit, Runny Babbitt. And just to give an example, here's one of the poems. The funny Bamily Runny fat a Hamily. Matter of fact, he had a Souther and 2 Bristers, a dummy and a mad. His mama fed him Merrick Kilk and Parrot Kai and such, and all of them were happy in their cozy honey bunch. So you can see they're switching the first letters around, right? So my wife is reading a poem similar to this one, and my daughter stops her and said, Mommy, that's the commutative law, isn't it? It is. And so they went down, probably didn't have to do that, but they did. They went down, my daughter probably wanted to do it, finished off the math lesson, and the day was saved. So what was the curriculum there? Wasn't the math book. One more just real quick example. Again, a math example. This happened not too long ago. One of my daughters, another daughter, was doing her math work, plugging through it, and she stopped. She said, Daddy, what's a mortgage? A mortgage? She was doing a word problem that brought up interest rates and mortgages and whatnot. Now, I could have, and I'm sure I have before done this, said, well, it's just, you take the interest rate, multiply it by that, and you're done. But I said, no, this will be a good opportunity. So for the next hour, we put the math book away, and I talked about what a mortgage is. And she asked, why do people get mortgages? Why don't they just buy a house? We had to talk about that. We had to talk about banking and interest, and why do banks pay people to give them money, and just on and on and on. But at the end of that time, she knew what a mortgage was, and she knew, the best way to go about doing things like that. So, again, what was the curriculum there? Again, it wasn't the math book. So that's one thing that, a couple points about that, about those 3 examples. One thing to keep in mind is whatever curriculum you choose, it should align with what your goal in homeschooling is. The goal should not be to complete a certain curriculum. The curriculum is there to help you, because you're going to find out you're not going to be using this math book and this science book and this history book for all your curriculum. There's going to be all these other opportunities to learn and to teach. But I also bring these 3 examples up. They're pretty different, and that's the point. There is no one solution to fit all. There is nothing I could stand up here and say, okay, everybody in this room, this is the curriculum you need to do. Honestly, that would be pretty rude on my part, I think, because so many variables. I don't know anything about your family, the ages of your children, the budget you have, how many children you have, what their learning style is, on and on and on and on. So you're not going to hear me get up here and just say, okay, here's the curriculum to choose. Here's what I recommend. Even if you come in the store, I won't go right to that point. But here's the good news, is you can tailor your own curriculum. And it seems scary right now, I know, how do I do that? But you will, and you can tailor your own curriculum. And we're blessed that we have the freedom to be able to do that and to figure it out as we go. So let me go through the C's, navigating the C's of curriculum here. The first one, probably where I'll spend the most time, will be with choices. And as Gail mentioned, there are, you said hundreds, but then I started thinking, well, when it boils down to it, just about, well, no, everybody has a different curriculum at the end of the day. You may use the same one that your neighbor does or your friend does, but you're going to do it in a different way, or you're going to implement different things. So really, there might be as many people as homeschool. That might be how many choices you have when it comes to homeschool curriculum. But I'm just going to walk through, and they're in your outline for you. The first one is traditional, and I do have that in quotes, and traditional is the word you would hear for this type of curriculum. And really, I put it in quotes because, it's just traditional because that's what the last few generations have used in most public schools and private schools and whatnot. If you ask somebody 100, 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, this would not be their traditional style of schooling. But the traditional style, that's probably what we, growing up, if you were like me, had a public school education, this is what you're most familiar with. These are going to be textbooks. These are going to be workbooks. These are going to be teacher books. The traditional curriculum is mostly going to be the curriculum that's used in a lot of private Christian schools. So there'll be teacher books for the teachers, student books for the classroom, but those same materials can also be used in a homeschool environment. You're going to find that it's structured. It's a formal curriculum. You're going to have age-graded books. So you'll have grade 1, here's history, science, math, etc. grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. It's going to be more broad in what it teaches than deep, maybe, because it's going to cover all those things. And one thing I do want to say, I did mention teacher books, and I don't want you to think that this is the only approach that has teacher books. Homeschool curriculum companies, they know their market. They know who they are selling to. They're selling to parents like us. And so there are teacher supplements, materials, books for just about any curriculum you go out and purchase. So don't feel like this is the only approach where you're going to have a teacher book in your hand. If I don't mention it, just know every other approach I'm going to talk about will have some sort of teacher material for you. Okay. So what are some examples? Who are some of the companies you'll see in this traditional approach? This will be your Bob Jones, BJU. They have a homeschool curriculum. It's used in their school, but it's also a homeschool curriculum. Abeka, you'll hear. Those are kind of the two big ones. K-12, which that may or may not get into that virtual homeschool, but I'll leave that aside. But virtual online school. Rod and Staff is another one that's probably not in the same mold as BJU and Abeka, but another one. And there are many more. I'm not going to name all of them, but just to give you, if you've heard of some of the curriculums people are using, these are some of the more popular ones. So what do people say about traditional homeschool curriculum? Some love it. Some like the fact that it's all laid out for you. You have a teacher book. It tells you what to say. It tells the students to turn to this page in their student book and this page in their workbook, and here's tests, and here's keys for the tests, and it's all there, and it's all scripted out for you. Some people like that. It makes sense. Some people are a little overwhelmed by all that, all these teacher books and student books and workbooks and tests and keys and posters and flashcards. It can feel a little overwhelming in that respect, but also in cost. If you go look at BJU and buy a full package, it might be a little pricey. But it is a good jumping off point for people who are new to homeschooling, because it is all laid out for you. It is all there. There are cheaper ways to purchase that. And we see that a lot of homeschoolers do start in this type of this traditional curriculum and even continue all the way through. So that's the traditional approach to homeschooling. The next one I want to talk about is the classical education model. And this one, I don't know, has anyone heard about the classical education? A little bit? Okay, a little bit. So I'm going to give a real high level. There's a lot more to talk about, but just give a real high level of what classical education is if you start to hear this style. It's based on the way the Greeks used to educate their children, and even all through history up till the last 150 years, let's say. But you'll hear the term trivium. It's a Latin word for 3 ways. You hear that's actually classical education is where the term liberal arts comes from. If you've heard that, it may be skewed a little bit today, but the 7 liberal arts are what a classical education is. The trivium is the first 3 arts of the 7 liberal arts. Quadrivium, I won't talk about that, but that's the rest of the 7 liberal arts. So the trivium, let me just briefly describe. Again, these are some words you might hear as you're talking with people who maybe use this type. There's 3 stages, the 3 ways of a trivium. There's grammar, there's logic, and there's rhetoric. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And really not exactly, but just for purposes of explaining, it kind of lines up to elementary, middle school, high school. Think of it in those terms, maybe. So what is the grammar stage? You know that any 6-year-old boy or 7-year-old girl, whoever, if you sit them down in front of a TV, or if you have have them listen to the same song that is played, they're going to remember that song, or they're going to remember that TV jingle they hear, or whatever they take in, because that's how their brains are wired. So the grammar stage is about mastery of facts. You're learning, or the kids are learning, well, you are too with them, you're learning the what, the when, the where, the who. You're learning that the War of 1812 happened here, and the Revolutionary War was started in here, and so on and so forth. You're learning facts. You don't know the why, but you're learning these facts. And so if you think that's how you learn anything, you start with the basics, right? So that's the grammar stage. The logic stage, or sometimes you might hear the word dialectic stage, dialogue. This is where, and you think about middle schoolers, this is where they start to question. Okay, this is where they start to ask why. Why did the War of 1812 occur? Why did the colonies want to break away from Britain? So they start to question, but they also start to piece things together at this stage. They have this bevy of facts at their fingertips, and I'm using I'm using history facts here because that's easy to do, but it's facts across the gamut, science, English grammar, and so on and so forth. But they start to put things together. Okay, the War of 1812 happened here, but what was going on in Europe at that time? Or what was going on in Australia? Or what scientists were making discoveries when that was happening? And just start to put together these ideas in your head and the relationships between these facts that you've learned. So that's the logic stage. So grammar, you learn the facts. Logic, you start to put them together and question, why did that fit there? And then the rhetoric, the high school, if you will. That's where you've gone through, you've learned the facts, you've sorted them out, you've questioned them, and now you're going to use language to apply what you know, whether that be maybe in persuading somebody trying to persuade somebody about a certain thing, or debating somebody, teaching somebody how to do something. That's where the rhetoric skills come out. So those are just some key terms you might hear in a classical education. Some other terms or things you might hear about it. It uses the great books. That's a term used quite a bit. It uses classic works of literature from young ages all the way up to the highest age. You hear about the study of Latin. What's that all about? But that's a piece of the classical education, not limited to classical, but a piece of it. A gentleman who is in the classical education movement, if you will, he was asked, what is classical education? And he gave this answer, which I love. Classical education is the cultivation of wisdom and virtue by nourishing the soul on the true, the good, and the beautiful by means of the seven liberal arts, so that in Christ a person is better able to know, glorify, and enjoy God. Or just, if you take anything away from that, it's the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. So what are some resources there, or some companies that are in that space? I brought this book along, The Well-Trained Mind. This is a book a lot of people usually run to first. It's thick, but you probably don't have kids in all ages from 5 to 18 here, so you might not have to dig into the whole book. But this explains what a classical education is, provides references, and in other words, it provides curriculum recommendations. This is a third edition. I think there's a fourth edition out now, but they're really just updating curriculum suggestions and recommendations. There are other resources, but I just brought this one along here. Some of the companies companies you would hear in the classical education. Christy mentioned Classical Conversations. That is one of the leaders, I guess, in the classical movement. There's communities, all through the upstate, all through the world, but that's a big one. Classical Academic Press, Memoria Press, Veritas Press, and there are others, many others, but those are just some of the big ones. So if you hear a friend who says they use Memoria Press, they might be in the vein of a classical education. And I should say on the outline, you may have already noticed, on the back I've referenced or just made a list of some of these books or resources that I'm mentioning here. One of the things you'll see on the back is an essay by Dorothy Sayers called The Lost Tools of Learning. Has anyone ever heard of Dorothy Sayers? I hadn't until a few years ago. She was friends with and cohorts with C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, while they were at Oxford, part of a group called the Inklings. And anyway, she wrote this essay called The Lost Tools of Learning, and it's about the trivium. So read that, read it again, read it again, read it again. It's one of those, every time I read it, I find more information about. So what do people say about classical education? Some people just fall in love with that approach. Once they kind of sort of wrap their brain around it, because it's more likely than not different from anything you had growing up. But some people feel like it's a little too different. What do you mean there's not age-based grades? What do you mean I'm going to study Latin? What do you mean I'm going to be reading these books and talking about them? It's just too different, and that's fine. Again, I'm not up here recommending or saying there's only one way to do it, because I don't believe there is. So that's what some people say about classical education. The next one, the Charlotte Mason education. Charlotte Mason was actually a lady that lived in England. She was a British educator. About the turn of the century is when she was writing and doing most of her work. But the Charlotte Mason method, and I'll just quote from a website here called Simply Charlotte Mason. Obviously, they're behind that method. And it says, the Charlotte Mason method is based on Charlotte's firm belief that the child is a person, and we must educate that whole person, not just his mind. Okay? And there's three distinctives that a Charlotte Mason approach will take or talks about. Charlotte wrote about the atmosphere, the discipline, and the life. So the atmosphere would be the child's surroundings. The discipline would be cultivating habits with the child. And then life would be living thoughts and ideas and experiencing life, not just the facts. So what are some of the key terms or distinctives about a Charlotte Mason education? You may have heard the term living books, if you have anyone who's in homeschooling and uses Charlotte Mason. Living books is a primary source of curriculum in the Charlotte Mason groups, or those that homeschool that way. And a living book is defined this way. A living book is written by a single author. The author owns those ideas and loves the subject they're writing about. Sounds a little different than a textbook, doesn't it? Living book is personal in tone and feel, and appeals to the emotions of the reader. Again, a little different from a textbook. A living book, the author assumes the reader is intelligent and a capable thinker, and they use creative ideas to stimulate imagination. So living books, you're going to have a book that's about animals in the woods, or a very focused, specific subject that's written not in a textbook fashion, but in a fashion that's almost a story, or that you can tell the author really has a passion about. Other distinctives or things that make a Charlotte Mason method, narration is a big part. So you'll read a story to the child, and they tell you back what they think what happened. They tell it in their own words. You copy great works of literature to see to model how great writing is done. Very involved in nature and art and fine arts and all these things. Very hands-on, a lot of activities and so forth. And some of the companies or resources, I grabbed this one. There's others for sure, but for the children's sake, Susan Schaefer-McCauley, she talks about a Charlotte Mason education. I mentioned the website. It's also a curriculum company, simply charlottemason.com. Queen Homeschooling is another in the Charlotte Mason style. There are others, but just a few. So what do people say about this approach? Well, they love the freedom that they have. They love the books. They love the hands-on activities. What are some of the things that people who aren't quite keen on a Charlotte Mason education, they're not comfortable with an apparent lack of structure. They need maybe more the traditional style of here's a teacher book and show me what I need to do to teach my kids. Okay. So that's the Charlotte Mason approach. Then the next one there is the whole book approach, and there's different titles. That's the one I kind of picked and used. Whole book, I guess, is similar to a Charlotte Mason approach, but has a little more structure to it. Maybe provides an umbrella of these are the books to use in this year. A lot of those books are going to be readers or storybooks and nature books and whatnot. So a whole book approach, again, not using a textbook, by using literature and other good books to learn one or several subjects. This is really a good approach. Well, people who like this, they use it with their young kids. You can use it with your older kids. It's very flexible that way. And some of the companies you'll hear that are in this whole book approach, you'll hear the word, or the company Sunlight is one, My Father's World, 5 in a Row. All of those, well, 5 in a Row, I should say, is probably more on the younger kids' age. My Father's World and Sunlight, they have curriculum all the way up through high school. Beautiful Feet is another one, and I mentioned Beautiful Feet just because those previous three, those are mostly, they cover not all subjects, but most of the subjects that you need to homeschool in. Beautiful Feet is an example where it's going to be more specific on history, or maybe some literature too, but mostly on history. Okay, so, and there are many, many other options. Those are just some maybe the more popular ones, I'll say. So what do people say about this whole book approach? People who use it love the books. The books are excellent books. In our store, we separate out. We have a literature and reader section, and pretty much all the books that are there are either Sunlight books or My Father's World and other ones. But they're just good books. They're not twaddle, as Charlotte Mason would use, mindless books. I won't name any book series, but my wife, she gave one of these twaddle books to one of my daughters and said, read this, tell me what you think. And it was one of those, whatever, back and forth. And my daughter read a few pages and gave it back, said, blah, blah, blah. All it is, he said this, she said that, he said this, he said that. Just useless. So mindless books you might hear. That is not what the Sunlight books or the whole book approach. Those are not the types of books that are used in this curriculum. These are going to be good classic stories that are more than just twaddle. So love the books. You have a new reader, a new book you're reading every day that pertains to a certain subject you're doing. Has a little more structure than Charlotte Mason. And it's really good for young learners, but all the way up through high school, they offer options. So people who maybe try these types of approaches, what do they say? It doesn't quite work for them. Maybe feeling a little overwhelmed. All these books, or all these things I'm supposed to be doing, it's hard to juggle. Sometimes we tell folks in the store, don't look at these whole book curriculums as a recipe where you have to do all of it for it to be successful. Think of it more as a menu where you kind of pick and choose what you like. But that's one thing that people might feel a little overwhelmed with the whole book approach. And there are others. Let me just mention a couple other examples. Unit studies, that might be something you hear as you talk to some people who homeschool or start to do the research. A unit study is just that. You're going to pick you're going to choose a curriculum that picks a certain theme or subject or idea, and you're going to do all these different things about that idea. So let me give an example that might help to kind of put it into your mind. One of my daughters, we kind of made a change, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but a change in her homeschool approach compared to her other two sisters. And one of the first things my wife did in the beginning of the year was a unit study on Leonardo da Vinci. A lot of things that he did, of course. So what did they do? They read books about Leonardo, learned the history of him. They studied where he lived, so learned geography. Like I said, they read books. So that's reading. That's the literature there. They studied science, some of the inventions that Leonardo came up with, which are fascinating. They studied art. Of course, he was a great painter, sculptor, and so forth. So they did a lot of study about that. Math. Yep, math. They obviously being a scientist and inventor, there's a lot of math worked in there. So that's a unit study. Now, my wife kind of pulled all that together, but there are companies out there that do this for you. The big one you're going to hear is Amanda Bennett. She has unit studies on about anything and everything. So it's just that, using multiple subjects around a single topic. Some people kind of sort of do this as their main approach to using a curriculum. Probably most people, like my wife in this case, use it as a supplement or kind of a break a little bit from a normal routine, if you will. So probably used more as a supplement, I would say, than as a full curriculum option. There are others, just briefly, there's some that are independent or self-instructional, Life Pack by Alpha Omega, Christian Light, Paces, and things like that. So that's going to be where you're going to have maybe a set of 10 workbooks and a teacher book, and the student's just going to work through workbook 1 on math, and when they're done, they'll take workbook 2, and all the teaching and everything is inside there. There's unschooling. You might hear that term. I'm not sure. Unschooling kind of goes against using curriculum per se, but there's not really much to say about that other than it's more child-directed, it's more unstructured, informal, not really a proven method, I might say. So I've talked about some different approaches, and I haven't even mentioned a lot of the companies. There's some math curriculum, science curriculum, history, English grammar, writing. There's a lot of curriculum options out there, and I didn't want to come up here and just rattle them off and have you sending off in 18 different directions, because that's what we did when we started. But there are a lot of options in those subjects, and for example, there's a math curriculum that might be used in a traditional setting, it might be used in a classical setting, it might be used in a Charlotte Mason. So there's a lot of curriculum options. So if I didn't mention one that you maybe have heard from your friends or what have you, there's a lot of options out there in those subject-based curriculum options. So what's right for you? That's probably what you're thinking, right? You're not really going to know until you start. And even once you start, you're going to realize what's not right for you than what is right for you. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So you're not going to know from the beginning. And Gail mentioned wisely, commit to a year of doing a homeschool. And what I would say maybe on the back end of that, when you decide to go to a second year, just know that your second year, what curriculum you're going to choose is probably going to be different than what you used in the first year. Even if you choose a traditional method where I'm just going to pick Bob Jones across the board, use all their curriculum, you get through a year, it was good, but maybe that math and Bob Jones didn't quite work for you. So let's pull that out and use Saxon math or whatever you want to use. And that's okay. It's going to evolve. The curriculum for you is going to evolve, and it's probably going to be a mix of these approaches that I just talked about. So don't feel like you have to set up borders and say, I am a traditional person or I am a classical person. That's not what it's all about. But as you start to research curriculum, the go-to place is Kathy Duffy. Actually, I think Kathy Duffy has become a verb in the homeschool community. You need to Kathy Duffy that. She's got this book, 102 top picks. You'll see older editions, 100 top picks, 101 top picks, 102 now. They're all going to have the same general content, but she's wisely updating as new curriculum comes out and updates come out to curriculum. So this is really a go-to resource. It talks about learning styles of your child, teaching styles for you, and which curriculum is going to fit. She portrays the learning styles as Wiggly Willy or Sociable Sue or Perfect Paula. And there's one more, but and then she'll say for a curriculum, this would be great for Wiggly Willy, but not so much for Perfect Paula. And she kind of guides you through that. That's in the book, but her website, KathyDuffyReviews.com, she gives just a lengthy review over probably just about any homeschool curriculum that is out there. So if you as you start to research your curriculum, this book or certainly her website are probably places you want to start, KathyDuffyReviews.com. I just want to mention this too, because some of the things I talked about here I got from this book. This is another excellent book, Educating the Wholehearted Child. They don't necessarily go about recommending particular curriculums to use, but they just talk about the whole homeschooling approach, and there is a pretty sizable section about different curriculum types. So that's another resource by Clay Clarkson and Sally Clarkson. They're pretty recognizable names in the homeschool community as well. Okay, so those are just some choices. The first C, and now very quickly your mind will go to, okay, what is it going to cost, right? The next C. I don't have an answer for you. It's going to vary. It really is going to vary. Kind of my tongue-in-cheek answer when people ask that in the store, my wife kind of gives me the elbow, but I say it could be anywhere from $50 to $500, per kid. you know, and anywhere in between. There is no right answer to that. And one thing my wife also wisely says is when people are talking about the cost of curriculum, you know, if you don't want a public school, I could probably say, you know, most of the time, if not all the time, homeschool curriculum is going to be cheaper than a private school tuition. So, you know, kind of rattle that around the back of your head. I will say that expensive does not always mean best for you. If you are, say, back to the traditional approach, if you start looking at that and you see all these resources and you feel overwhelmed by it all, don't feel like you should do it just because it's the most expensive, so it might be the best out there. That's not the way to look at it. So actually, I would even, for younger kids, if you have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, go the cheaper route. I mean, technically, legally, you know, you don't have to homeschool a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. Yeah, I think it's kindergarten or first. There's details there, but that's when you legally have to sign up with an accountability group that Gail mentioned. So 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 4-year-old, don't go out and, well, I mean, you can, but I would recommend don't spend a lot of money and then spend a week with it and realize that this big, huge curriculum you just bought isn't working for your 3-year-old. A really good resource if you have young children, 3, 4, 5 years old, or even in the early, first, second grade, Ruth Bichek. She wrote this, well, they were 3 individual books, but they put it all together in one book. The 3 R's is the name of it. And it's really geared towards, it says grades K through 3, maybe 3, 4-year-olds you could glean from this as well. But her 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. So the books, if you see them in the individual form, there's a home start in reading, a strong start in language, and an easy start in arithmetic. So Ruth Bichek, the 3 R's, is a good resource if you're just looking for something to do for your 3-year-old and want some ideas, or even for your 4 or 5-year-old. So that's really all I have to say about cost. But I should say there are a lot of options out there, whether it's new or whether it's used or an older edition. There's times where you can use an older edition of a curriculum. There's times where you really can't, and we can help you with that. The next C, changes, and Christy wisely said this earlier. It is okay to change. It is okay to change. Actually, if you're not changing, you might want to wonder, did I really make it perfect right out of the gate here? You're more likely going to change what you're using, and that's okay. Like I alluded to earlier, we made a pretty significant shift with one of our daughters this past school year, just for various reasons. And so my wife and I, of course, were in a homeschool store all day, and so we're researching all these different options, and we choose one. It's a good one. I'd still recommend it to other people. But after about 4 or 5 weeks of using it, it wasn't working for my daughter, and it wasn't working for my wife. So we weren't going to stick with that for the rest of the school year. So we changed. So decided to make a major shift from the previous year, chose something, and very quickly we realized that wasn't going to work either, and so we changed from that. That's actually what brought about the Leonardo da Vinci unit study that filled the gap while we figured out what it was we were going to do. So that's just an example of how change can occur. I mentioned earlier, don't be a slave to the curriculum. Don't stick to a curriculum just because you're halfway through the year and you're in tears and your child's in tears and you're having more of those days and maybe you should be of, where's that yellow school bus? You're not a slave to the curriculum. You can change. It's a pretty easy process to change, working with your accountability group. So don't feel like just because you decided on something in August that you have to use it all the way till May. You can change. It's fine. Remember, the curriculum is not the goal of what you're doing. You're using the curriculum to achieve your own goal. Do start with what you think will work, but don't force it. I've kind of mentioned that a little bit. One of our friends in the store who's come in quite a bit and has homeschooled for a while, we've talked to her about this, and I love her little quote about this. She says, throw out the curriculum, not the kid. So one thing to maybe keep in mind there. You're going to hear however many people you talk to, that's how many opinions you're going to get about homeschool curriculum. So don't feel like you've got to go along with what your best friend is using. Now, she may be very wise. I know Caroline, my wife's sister, who was homeschooling before we were, was a tremendous help to Caroline in helping us pick our curriculum. But you're going to hear different opinions from different people, especially if they've been homeschooling for a little while, maybe even a lot of times if they haven't been homeschooling for a little while. But you can change from the way they do it. You can do it your own way. You can do it. And like I said earlier, over the years, your curriculum is going to develop into a unique curriculum for you. The longer you homeschool, the more unique your curriculum is going to be. And I should say too, it's okay to change between your kids. Now, I'm not saying that's the easiest thing in the world, but for example, in math, 2 of my daughters use one math, and 1 of my daughters uses another. And if I switched that around, it would be chaos. It really, in a lot of respects. So don't feel like you have to pick one that you're going to use for your whole family. That would be great, or it may work that way, but don't feel like that's what you have to do. Briefly, let me just wrap up the C's here. Calendar, just want to make a few notes about this. Again, don't be a slave to the curriculum. If you've had a rough week and it's Friday, take a field trip to the zoo. Put the curriculum away, go do something else. Know that you have that flexibility to your daily routine. There's been times where, and incentives may have been used, where some of our daughters were up doing their homeschool before we were up. I come down, the schoolroom light is on, and they're plugging away because maybe we want to go do something that day. So your daily routine may be different, each day. I mean, it's probably good to have a routine, but don't feel like you have to be a slave to it. It's also flexible to your overall schedule. Like Gail mentioned, you have to do 180 days in a school year. And most accountability groups you're going to start signing up about now, and it'll be, you have 100 or the whole year to do 180 days. Some people school year round. Some people do 5 weeks on, 1 week off. Some people start in August or September and go through May and June. Some people, I had a lady today came in, they do from January to October, then take off a couple months. So you have flexibility in that, not only in your overall schedule, but hey, homeschoolers, we get to go travel when everybody else is in school. And it can be curriculum. A few years ago, we were studying U.S. history, and we took a week vacation up to Philadelphia. And my girls were stunned that they were in the room where the Constitution was signed and Declaration of Independence and all this around, and they were learning it. And by the way, speaking of curriculum examples, we went, the National Park Service, they offer these junior ranger badges you can get. So we went to Philadelphia, and we went to the ranger station, got a 20, 30-page packet where everywhere we went, Ben Franklin's home, Independence Hall, wherever, there were questions that the girls had to listen to the ranger giving their speak, fill in the questions, and then if the rangers, and a lot of times they did this, if they didn't give an answer, the girls would go up and ask, hey, what about, such and such. So we were homeschooling up in Philadelphia. We also went to Great Wolf Lodge in February, and we were the only people there. It was great. So calendar, you can have flexibility, even when it comes to curriculum. Especially if you choose one of these more flexible options. Don't feel like you have to finish the grade 3 math book in this year. If you're having to repeat lessons and stay on a topic, camp out on a topic for a little while, that's okay. If you get 80% of the way through your grade 3 math, and then you take a break for the summer or whatever your schedule is, guess what? You can pick right up where you left off and go on your merry way the next year. So don't feel this pressure to finish books and get them done. Or a lot of times it happens on the flip side too. Especially as your kids get older, they'll get through things maybe quicker, especially if they have a passion. If they love history and they're getting through the history curriculum, hey, just go to the next one. It may be February, that's okay. You go to the next book. Keep the interest going. Keep the curriculum going. So that's calendar. And then lastly with celebrate. As Gail said, you do have to decide just to do it. And yeah, there's going to be tough days. But boy, when you get to the end of your first year, you're going to look back and say, I did it. I just did that. I just homeschooled my children. It's amazing. And oh, by the way, think of how much more time you just spent with your kids than if they went off to a school. If that's not reason to celebrate, I don't know what is. But what you also want to, or you will celebrate, is you're going to learn right along with them. I don't know what I learned growing up. I either forgot it all or wasn't paying attention or wasn't taught it or who knows what. But I'm learning things that I never knew before, and it's fascinating. And a lot of it's not through a textbook. It's through reading real books. So celebrate the fact that you're homeschooling. So in conclusion, I'll conclude with this. Yeah, curriculum is important. You have to have curriculum, but it is not merely, it is merely a, not the, a means to your end, to whatever your goal is. So what is your goal in homeschooling? Like I said, when I heard that question asked about 3 or 4 months ago, I didn't have an answer. So I struggled with that, and I knew why, and I knew it was good and what we were going to do, but I didn't have a goal. We didn't write it down. So I was attending another seminar or practicum, and heard another speaker give an answer to this question, and I knew this person. I was like, oh, can't wait to hear what she says. And she defined it, and that was it. That was our goal. And the goal of homeschooling for her and now for my wife and I is stated as twofold. Teach your child to learn, teach your child to think. That's it. Whatever you need to use to teach them, or for us anyway, to teach them how to learn, teach them how to think. Lord willing, when our girls, when they leave our house, if they're able to learn on their own, able to think on their own, that's going to be a good thing. That's going to be a reason to celebrate, right? And with these goals accomplished, with these skills, these tools of learning that they have, they're going to be able to go out into this world, this fallen world, and discern, right? And we need more of that in this world. And certainly with these skills and by the power of the Holy Spirit, of course, they'll be able to study God's Word, understand God's Word, apply His Word in their lives. With these skills that they of learning how to learn and learning how to think, and of course by the power of the Holy Spirit that God gives us, they will, Lord willing, be able to know Christ, believe Christ, trust Christ, and that's the ultimate goal, right? That's the ultimate goal. So following or choosing a certain curriculum doesn't achieve that ultimate goal. Okay, curriculum is important, but it's merely a means. Just remember that. Whether it's Nathaniel Bowditch reading the encyclopedia and keeping a notebook, whether it's reading a silly poem about Runny Babbitt, or working a difficult math problem for over an hour, or reading a biography about a great Christian missionary, or reading a classic out loud to your kids, reading Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe or whatever to your kids, taking a field trip to the Creation Museum, or taking hours to study God's Word so that I can answer that deep theological question my 12-year-old just asked me. These are all means to help your child learn how to learn how to think. And with these means, we can reach, hopefully, the ultimate end to know God and to glorify Him forever. So I'll finish with this. Paul wrote in Philippians 4, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." That's what I want my children to think about. I'm sure that's probably what you want your children to think about. And that's what your curriculum, that's what it needs to help you do. Thank you.
I'm just thoroughly thrilled, and I know you have some questions. Anybody have a question you want to ask, or just a comment that you want to make? Just raise your hand, and I'll hand you this microphone. No questions? Well, y'all really did a good job. I'm telling you, if there's no questions. All I can say is, who knows your child best? Who knows your child best? Just remember that. Who knows your child best? And I'll tell you, as a first grade teacher for 29 years, at the very beginning of the year, I didn't know your child best. That parent knows that child best. And teachers are tied to a curriculum. We don't have these choices. We're told what to do, how to do, when to do, where to do. And we just don't have that freedom of what you would have homeschooling. And I can't recommend it enough. And I know, coming from a public school teacher, I'm sure there's other public school teachers that are going, what is she doing? But I'm serious. Teachers in our public schools do have their hands tied. And there are great teachers in our public schools, but they are under pressure. And the pressure began with all this testing. That became the holy grail, a test score. And that's what's made it go downhill ever since No Child Left Behind came into being. And I saw it, and I saw what was coming. And then they doubled down on it with Common Core. And that's what's driving everything now in those public schools. And it's a shame. It's a real shame. So I am encouraging you to go out and start this adventure with your homeschool and share it. Get it going. We need more. If we're going to affect any change in our public schools, they need to know that we're going to pull our kids out because we don't like what's going on. If you continue to just continue the same thing, it's not ever going to get any better. But the more people we can convince to try it, maybe it won't be for you. It might not. I don't know. I can't say. But I know, given what I know from teaching and saw what the direction was going, it doesn't look like there's going to be much change, even though they're saying we're going to get choices now. In South Carolina, the charter schools still have to use Common Core standards. Now, they'll tell you it's college career ready standards now, but it's 92% in line with Common Core. So you've got faulty standards as the foundation in our public schools. What he just got through telling you about all the choices of curriculum and how you can tailor that to a child right now in our public schools, it's cookie cutter education. They're using the same thing for every single child, and that's wrong because not every child learns the same way, and you know your child best. So I applaud you for being here. And I can't wait to hear some success stories I hope you'll share with us. And, I'm on Facebook, Johnny L. Raines, if you want to friend me. I would love to hear what's going on as you start your journey. And I'd like to give another round of applause, if you will, to our speakers because they did an excellent job tonight. And thank you all for coming, and I'm sure they'll be standing by. If you didn't want to be on microphone, you could probably ask them a question on your own. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.